I'm looking forward to this, guys. We're here with Kevin McNulty, and I just met Kevin, to be honest with you, but man, he came highly referred to me, and I didn't really know if it would be, if he was really all that or not. And all of a sudden, I meet this awesome guy, and we start talking, and we had to stop visiting so we could get to this podcast. Kevin, that's when you know you're gonna like somebody. And man, I knew after we started talking about 2 minutes that I like this guy. And you've done so much, but welcome to Crossing the Line. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Larry. The pleasure is completely mine. And I don't, if you want to just repeat that whole intro thing there, I'm happy for you to do it. Let's just say I'm having a low self-esteem day. So go ahead and say that again.
Yes. Let me just say it again. We'll try to get that on a loop.
Okay. Yeah. Get it on a loop thumb drive and send it to me. There you go.
Oh,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. You've done so much. You're an author and a coach and an educator of leadership. And by the way, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
You served us in the military. We certainly appreciate that. And so we just want to spend some time today getting to know you and hearing your story, because it's worth hearing. You didn't get to where you are today, just by having an easy life and not overcoming some things. So we want to learn from you today, Kevin, and we're so excited about that. And so I want to just jump right in, because I want to make sure we watch our time. And let's go back to where did you grow up, Kevin? You're an 8-year-old guy. You're in your parents' home. Where are you? Give us what it's like a day in the life of Kevin as an 8-year-old.
Well, let me just start by saying it's complicated, but. When I was 8 years old, let's see, I was probably actually living in Bad Tölz, Germany, in the Bavarian Alps. Believe it or not. Now, you probably didn't see that coming. Because I was raised as a military brat. So I was born at Womack Army Hospital at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. My father, was in the Army at the time. He happened to be a Special Forces Green Beret. God rest his soul. He just passed on me last April. But so, as a result of that, he spent 26 years in, I really spent the first 19 years of my life moving around as a brat, really. And so I think around 8, I would have been in Bad Tölz, which has some wonderful memories for me. Again, every 2-3 years we moved, and that was such a blessing, and it came with challenges too, right, that I had to realize later in life.
Right. So Kevin, talk about that a little bit. You grew up in a military home, moving around. It was a blessing, I'm sure, because it exposed you to so much culturally.
That's right.
What were some of the challenges that you faced? I can't imagine moving that much. What was that like for you?
Well, as a child, you don't think about it that much. When I reflect back on it, I mostly see really positive outcomes. For instance, I would say in a more positive sense, even particularly towards the work that I do, I'm in the soft skills, business. That's what I mostly coach about. And of course, that is primarily, how you think about things and how and your people skills and these sorts of things. And so moving around literally for 40 years, to be quite honest with you, because later when I was 19, I joined the Air Force. So I spent 19 years growing up. Then I joined the Air Force, actually, because I had a Special Forces dad. I tell people I felt like I was more in the military growing up than when I joined the military. He was a tough dude, man. He, and so it was interesting. But the point is that, I have a bit of a chameleon-like personality, and I don't mean that in the negative sense, but in the sense that I just don't know of too many situations that I can step into that I would feel uncomfortable. I just, and again, it's not magic to me, or it's not anything incredible. It's just the way that I was raised and what I learned from adapting so quickly. So to your point, there were times, probably the best example is that, for instance, in the 11th grade, I moved, it was either 4 or 5 times in one year. So as a junior in high school, I went to 4 different high schools. It might have been 5 because I ended up back in the original high school. But having said that, that was, of course, that's on the sort of the on the fringes of moving around when it comes to that sort of thing. But it wasn't unusual to to do multiple times, to do 2 high schools, to leave one school and go to the next. I think the military, as I think they do now, they try to manage that so that you maybe leave and go during the summertime so that you can start fresh. But I've stepped into the middle of a school year and looked around and was like, wow, this is, I don't know any of these people here. And so,
Wow.
the blessing there is the ability to move around, is to see a lot, it is to relate to people on all levels, from all backgrounds, from all sorts of scenarios. And as I continued to do that, I really can reflect back more, when I was an adult, to look back on how that impacted me than how it did at the time. For me, it was, the thing that they say, it was just my reality, and I enjoyed it a lot. The complicating parts, the more complicated parts really came after I retired from the Air Force and realized, it spawned my book. I ended up in this really very serious depression and anxiety state, and out of that came, thanks to God, all that came out of the book came out of this transition. But as I started talking about change and transition in the book, there was just so many realizations that came about. So on the one hand, I could navigate and adapt. You could send me to any country right now. I'd have no problem jumping in a rental car and driving, even if I've never been to the country. The difficult part was, especially after getting out, it was indeed like, assuming you've lived where you have all your life, that you packed up one day and moved to China. Yeah. And now you have to figure out everything. So I didn't know anything about business. I didn't have mentors, so to speak, because we constantly moved and constantly, I didn't understand the American workplace. I understood the American culture from a different standpoint. Even when we lived in the United States, oftentimes it was on a military base. So you see, I had this weird disassociation with a lot of things, but I also observed it from a different perspective. So all of those things come together, of course, as you well know, when you're an adult, and you start to, the question that always is in my mind is, can you shake it out? Can you shake out, the difficulties of it, the blessings and the curse, I guess you could say.
So to put this in perspective for us, just kind of think with me and think through, if you had to guess, and you may know the number exactly, how many high schools did you attend, if you had to guess?
For high schools alone, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, maybe something like that.
Now think about that for a moment. Yeah. Let's say 7, and that's just high school. 5 to 7. That's just high school.
Yeah.
Wow. And so to say that doesn't affect you. So I'm interested in your book, and I want you to tell us about it in just a few minutes. I want you to give us a little more information on that, because I think it's very relevant. But as you're a teenage guy and you walk into that classroom, you're in Germany or wherever, you walk in and you go, man, I don't know anybody. How did you deal with that? What was your coping mechanism to jump in there and survive? Yeah. Because you knew first that you were going to only be there a short time.
Right.
But you also knew you had to survive while you were there.
Right.
So how did you navigate
that? Honestly, it really depended. But so, for instance, when we were overseas, now I didn't go to, I think my the last time I was overseas was still elementary. So, and most of that was in Germany and Puerto Rico, but then in different places around the US. But I can tell that particularly where we were living on a military base and perhaps went to a military school, which a lot of
Uh-huh.
that has changed now, or if we were overseas and went to, like in Bad Tulsa, they had the American International School, I think they called it. But most of those people were, brats of special forces.
Yeah.
So we all, could instantly connect. There was no issues there. It was when we'd go to a different place. I went to high school, and I was another one I just thought about in Seal, Alabama, for instance, which is well, you're in Alabama, you may be
Yeah.
familiar with it. It's out in the boonies.
Wait, what's the name of the town?
Seal. It's near Phoenix City.
Okay, I know Phoenix City. Wow.
Well, I mean, if you haven't even heard
Yeah.
of Seal, I don't blame you, because it was out in the middle of the boondocks, as we said. I mean, it took us an hour and a half to drive to go take the bus to school, because we were going down so many dirt roads, picking up folks that lived in these shotgun houses and all these other sorts of things. So
Yeah.
again, there's a different example. I step into that scenario and I'm like, this is like a different planet to me. I mean, literally, it was like a different planet, different culture.
Oh, yes. Yes,
There
it
were
was.
some military brats that went there, but not so much at SEAL, because it was, so my dad was stationed in Columbus at Fort Benning there.
Yeah.
And so I spent a year. This was my ninth grade year. And, it was just so different to me. And so I step into these scenarios, and, and I assume have kids, you're
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to fit in, trying to adjust. But again, I reflect back now on my life, that as a military brat, I had no problems adjusting. I could step in, adjust, but fitting in was also challenging as well, because people didn't know me. So I could
Sure.
step into a scenario, but I wasn't necessarily accepted, if you will, for a lot of
Sure.
different.
Well, how could you be? But
Yeah.
so let's fact you're learning these hard lessons of being able to adapt and fit in.
Yep.
But now you're let's say you made it through all that. College is here. Where did you meet? Did you meet your wife in college? Tell us a little story about the young adult, Kevin.
Yeah, no, no, I didn't. And I'll tell you about that in a second. I would like to just back up just a minute
Okay.
and just say
Sure.
one thing about growing up, because, I'm thinking about, like, what were my greatest challenges. And this really exacerbated sort of the challenges that I had. Really had nothing to do with moving around, if you will, except for the fact that I learned later in life. And, I think everybody says this. I'm not trying to jump on the victim
Right.
bandwagon, but I had a very serious disability, and it was a
Mm.
learning disability.
Oh,
For
wow.
instance, I couldn't, I remember sitting in high school. This would have been maybe the 10th grade, or maybe the ninth grade. It's really odd. I'm trying to think if I know where I was, but if it was the ninth grade, I'm trying to think of exactly which high school it was, um, or which year it was, that we were learning pre-algebra. Now, I
Hmm.
think in the ninth grade by now, kids are into calculus, they're so much smarter than us. But honestly, Larry, I could not understand a word my teacher was saying. I looked at this, I'm listening to her put these problems on this board. Again, it's pre-algebra, so it doesn't get any simpler than that in terms of,
Right.
and I remember looking at that going, and I always struggled with math, but this was a whole different thing. I was like, I couldn't understand the language or anything, let alone
Mm.
the formula. So I remember one day she came walking around, she gave us some problems to solve. Again, these are simple problems. And she came around and she stood next to me, and I just sat there with my blank paper, and I guess perhaps the simple formulas were there to resolve, or we had to write them down. And I remember I was just staring at it, and I knew I could almost feel her breathing on me. I could still see her face. And and she said, and she said a couple of things, like asked me questions. So, Kevin, this is this, and I just stared. And I remember she bent down, kneeled down, and she put her arm on me. I remember, and I knew that she knew I was seriously struggling here,
Oh,
and
wow.
she kept trying to talk me through this. And I remember just in my head, I have no idea what's going on here, you know? And she patted me on the back and she said, you'll get it, and just walked on. And so this was sort of the reality of the learning problems that I had. And then the other thing, again, we didn't call it a learning problem back then. I just couldn't freaking figure it out. And then I had problems. The other part that I had problems with reading comprehension. I could literally read a paragraph and not tell you a single thing that I learned in reading that paragraph. So I say all of that because that then later on became very important to me, what I'm telling you there. In fact, I will tell you, it's kind of a funny story. And this is what I learned later on, is when again, it might've been the 9th grade, might've been the 10th grade. I'm trying to remember, but we had to do these book reports. And I would just freak out over this because of my reading comprehension. So what I learned to do is to go to the library, find a book that I was convinced my teacher would not have read, and that it had illustrations and big words, and sometimes it was well below my category. I'd take it home and I'd literally make up the story based on what I was seeing there. I'd turn in my book reports and I would get A's every single time doing it that way. I know, it's crazy, but that informed me later in my life. That was very important. So actually, I graduated out of Rayford, North Carolina, high school. My father had already moved on to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where he was teaching military science at Western Kentucky there. I moved up there for a year. My goal was to, because I was a musician growing up, I thought I would move to Bowling Green and hit Nashville and become a recording artist. And within a day, I'm probably exaggerating, I realized I wasn't even close. I mean, I had been writing songs since I was in the 9th grade. Actually, at 14 was the first song I'd written, and had probably written a couple hundred songs by this time. So I get to Bowling Green and I'm out of high school. I'm on my own. I was a bit of a hippie trying to do this. And I very quickly realized I couldn't do this. I was just not even in the ballpark as a songwriter, understanding how it all worked. And again, this is what I'm talking about. I didn't have any understanding of this world. And so I ended up joining the Air Force, and I didn't go to college. I joined the Air Force, and and like a rebellious teenager, I didn't like what my dad was telling me. He knew he knew college wasn't for me. And again, and I think he wanted me to just move on. Yeah. And so he was trying to talk me into the Army, and so just to piss him off, I joined the Air Force. I thought I had the last word, but the truth is that he could have cared less which service it was. Just do one, Right. So I joined the Air Force and spent 20 years in.
That's amazing. And did the Air Force provide for you what you were looking for? What about those 20 years of service that you gave?
Yes. For me, the Air Force was life-changing. It put in, and now I'm almost getting into all the things that I learned, but in a nutshell, it put the structure around what I needed. I later learned about my disabilities as I was getting older, and that everything from a form of dyslexia to just being really scatterbrained, and a short-term memory was not that good, and that to learn, I really needed step by step and really clear, simple instructions and all these other sorts of things. And so I started off, and interesting enough that when I joined the Air Force and took what they call the ASVAB, the test to go into the Air Force, I actually scored pretty high. And I later learned out why. So I ended up in an engineering field. I was still just a technician, but I went into the water and waste field, which required, a little bit more, just a little bit more intellect. But when my recruiter said that to me, and that I had the ability to choose from XYZ fields, I mean, there's different levels. So it wasn't at the highest level, but it was like a medium level. Whereas if you were at that level, there were some things that they would want you to go in because you had I guess you could say, let's just say the intellect to get in there. But
Right.
that meant nothing to me. When he said that, it probably just went straight over my head. I went into the field. I did that for about 6 years, basically water treatment and waste treatment. Fascinating job, quite frankly, as bad as it sounds, especially in the wastewater field. And then I ended up man, my life is so complicated. I have to cut out a bunch of stuff here because it takes too long. I'm not joking about this or trying to boast about it. There's
No.
so many different places that I could go. But the long short of it, two things happened to me. One, I joined this Air Force entertainment group that maybe some of your followers, if they're associated with the Air Force, would recognize them. It's an Air Force entertainment group called Tops in Blue, and Tops in Blue basically is like it's like a Vegas or a Disney or a Broadway style show of 30 members that travels the world doing shows for different purposes. So if you think about like the Thunderbirds, the Air Force Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels, they have a mission, and they go around and do these things, and it's for recruiting, but it's all sorts of things and morale purposes. Well, we did that from an entertainment standpoint.
Oh,
so just think about a Disney show that you would go to and see without the character, a live Disney show, a lot of choreographed, big band. And so I was a guitar player in this group. And that's a whole long story, but that's where I met my wife in 1984.
Was she a singer? What did she do?
She was a singer. Yes, I was a guitar player. She was a singer. And really, we were just good buds for a long time. And then, later on, there was a spark and this, that, and the other. So we've been together now 35 years. But that's how it went. But then to kind of get a little bit more back to the professional side, I ended up cross-training after my last tour. So I did 4 tours with them. And I ended up then getting into what's known as social actions or human relations education. So my world then became advising commanders and civilian managers about people problems, everything from diversity to equal opportunity treatment to team building to a lot of leadership stuff. It was a big integrated thing. So if you were like the wing commander, the general on base, my job, we worked directly for you. And my main job was to help you, or our office, I should say, a little agency on each base, was to make sure that you understood that you had your finger on the pulse of the human relations climate. So as you can imagine, we did employee engagement surveys. We counseled, we coached, we investigated problems. We dealt with employees and airmen. And so as you can imagine, that I did many years of that. That is what led me to the world of soft skills and the work that I do now.
My goodness. And here's what I can say to you, Kevin, we don't have enough time. We need more time. I need to hear from you. You have so much to teach us. And we're just now getting to the point to where we are, now we're getting to where you can share with us and give us your wisdom. And I want to do that. And we also, Robin, our producer, I think we've got a part 2 coming. I think this is part 2. But I want to get my hands around some of these nuggets from you right now, Kevin. Please. So as you're advising these military officers on people skills, on making sure they understand the people, did you find that it was difficult? And how did you translate what you're calling soft skills to people who are black and white thinkers and who are really mission driven? Yet you've got to help them understand what we call EQ, emotional intelligence. What was your strategy in that? Can you give us some nuggets around that?
Wow, that's a great question that has a lot of different complications to it. But I will back up. So now when it comes to sitting down with these military commanders, but also again, employees or airmen, we dealt with, airmen, supervisors, so all up and down the echelon. And this is where then my skills growing up came into play, that there just weren't many people that I would run across that I couldn't relate to, that I didn't understand. So what I realized about a lot of these different things was was making, in fact, if we talk about, like, let's just say diversity and inclusion right now, which has changed dramatically over just the last 2 years. Okay. Right. I literally, I mean, this sounds weird, and I apologize if it sounds too bold, but I consider myself actually an expert on diversity and inclusion. And I won't go deep into that.
Okay.
But in the last 2 years, it has changed so substantially that it's that a lot of people, I guarantee a lot of supervisors, managers, employees, executives are struggling with the big changes that have taken place. So the reason why I say that is because, in part, what I brought to the civilians private sector was the following, to answer your question. If you're a commander, Larry, you're a general, and you need my help in solving people problems. And let's just say you run a security forces outfit, that guards the perimeter of military bases overseas, or even in wartime. Why do you need to solve your people problems?
It's a great question.
I'm just fundamentally, why would you need to solve or have your people problems solved? Like decent morale, people getting along, no discrimination if possible, and these sorts of things. What would be like your bottom line? Why you need that to happen?
Because we need to execute, and we can't execute if the culture's imploding.
Bam. I mean, you just nailed it. And for obvious reasons, you're in this business. And that is exactly right. So in the military, we always approached commanders, and I stuck to this principle and mantra, that the reason why you need to solve this, despite what you think about it, is because you have, let's say, a female airman who's getting sexually harassed on the flight line at 3 a.m, and she works inside of aircraft engines. She's always, they're joking, and the fellows are joking about her body and how she looks bent over into that engine. And I would even ask a commander, what could go wrong there? And you just see them grab their head. They say, I just can't imagine an airman, a female airman of mine, feeling this way, working on an intake, trying to get out of this scenario as quickly as possible, and then inadvertently leaves a wrench up inside the intake. Wow. Correct. Yeah. And what's the problem? Well, lives and a lot of money could be, and a lot of stuff can be lost here. So that becomes then the argument, or the conversations that I'm having with anybody at any level, and say, this is why we have to solve this. And so then I brought this to the private sector, and it resonated a lot.
Sure, it does. If you want to execute in the business world, you better understand your people. We're gonna find out more about that. So you hang on to this, and for those of you listening, we're gonna have a part 2. I need to wrap this up right here, and I feel like we're just getting started. But I want to ask you two things as we turn this corner. We're going to come back to that, to what you just articulated. The leverage for people skills is execution and being able to do what we need to do in the business world.
The mission, you bet.
To be successful. But let's talk about your book, please. Tell us the name of your book. I want to make sure we get this in this time. So what's the name of your book?
Well, I appreciate it. It's called The Gap Between Two Worlds. And it's, turning difficult life transitions into personal growth experiences. So it's all about that. It's about how you take a very difficult transition in life, whatever it might be, and grow from it. So it's basically got this idea that there's the old world and the new world, and there's the gap in between. And so I talk a lot about what it takes to traverse the old world to the new world. You see, whether.
And if I want it, where do I get it, Kevin?
You go to Amazon. Yeah, Amazon would be the quickest way to go.
Beautiful. I can't wait to read it. A real life example. You're giving, you're teaching through what you've experienced, and there's no greater teacher. So thank you for writing it. We look forward to reading it, and I hope our listeners do as well. One more question for you, if you got just one more moment with us. There are aspiring leaders who are listening, who are going through struggles just like you. Maybe they have a learning disability. Maybe they're just struggling with life in this ridiculous world that we live in right now, where things seem to be going bonkers. What would you tell them? Hey, look, if you truly want to influence others, if you truly want to lead, here are some things you need to just know. Just some Kevin's tips for life and leadership,
Yeah.
what are 2 or 3 things you'd tell us?
Well, I'll stick to one of them, but I will say very briefly that there are a few things. The first thing that I would say is to, especially as a young aspiring leader, or not, or you don't have to be young to be an aspiring leader, but as an aspiring leader, right, is first and foremost, check your ego and go do your research about the ego and how that impacts your ability to lead, to learn, to grow. I'd say number 2, the best skill that you could ever learn as a leader is learning how to ask really good questions. And again, I'll just leave it at that and move on. I also like to tell leaders, especially as you're a newer leader, because you have an opportunity to sort of really develop and shape this, is to take care of your personal brand. And your personal brand, of course, is what other people think about you. And then the last thing that I will really spend just a moment on is that, because it relates back to my childhood, is to discover really, and I don't mean just like, okay, yeah, I know what I'm striving, really search and discover what your strengths are. Very quickly, Larry, back to when I was in the 9th grade and writing these book reports, what I learned later in life, this was after the Air Force, when I got into human relations education, I realized above all, my strength was my creativity. And it was how I ended up writing these book reports. But it was also, I realized it wasn't, and I don't think it's so much this way anymore, but if I said you were creative, especially to a man, to a leader, you'll be like, yeah, I mean, they don't really want to hear that. They hear you're a decision maker, you're going to do all these. Well, the creativity is a massive skill and tool that you have, especially if you lack a little bit more on the left side, that.
Right.
And so I'm just saying that was, it's a cliche, but that truly was and is my superpower, my ability to creatively, let's say, problem solve, creatively make this, all of these things, don't strictly come from my creative mind, right, but it's at the forefront for me, you see. And there you have it.
Well, Kevin, here we go. Here's what I want to ask you then. We're gonna practice what you're saying to us. When you come back, will you consider this? I have a request. When we do part 2, could we lead into part 2 with you playing the guitar?
Oh my gosh. Sure. Absolutely.
Will you do it for us? Creative.
I do it. Yeah.
I'm excited about it. So
either that or it may be the ukulele. It'd be a little easier to handle, but yes, I would be. I'd be glad
great.
to do it.
Listen, listeners, you gotta check us out, because part 2 is coming with the musical side of Kevin, and we want to see it. And we got so much more to talk about, Kevin. And we're going to. You are a brilliant man, brilliant leader. Well, thank you for teaching us, walking us through your past, being vulnerable with that, and then challenging us with what we need to do, not only as aspiring leaders, but any leaders really. These tips you've given us are amazing, but also the how you've challenged us to understand the importance of people skills and why those are just as important as task skills. So much more to talk about. Thank you for being with us today. You're a lot of fun. More than that, you're just a great leader, and I really appreciate it.
That's just so kind of you. I'm humbled by your words, but I'm very grateful to be here, Larry. I've heard a lot of good things about you, and certainly read up on you. And congrats to you and your team, really, on such great success. Honestly, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kevin. Until next time, take care.
Thanks. All right. God bless.